This conference will now be recorded.
Okay, so I mean, we've got some new faces. I think we have the recordings for this. I think this session is building on a lot of the Grasshopper sessions we've had before. So if you have any sort of questions about like the basics of Grasshopper, the Rhino environment, I think the sessions and the recordings that we have are a really good starting point because this might be a little bit more advanced for the people who don't have as much experience with it. But I could talk a little bit about the fundamentals of this. So, I have a Rhino model here that I imported from a project. It's just a Revit export of a lab building project that I have. It's all in white, and then it's a regular existing building that we're going to add an addition onto. And so for the addition, I just have these masses that are just floor by floor masses. And I also have a screen over here, which is going to be like a penthouse roof screen that we're also going to add to enclose. We're going to enclose all these atriums, put a bunch of lab mechanical equipment on the roof and enclose it. So thinking about how to basically model all these elements, right? So we have these solid chunks, and then we have these pieces of wall. And you can, all these objects, they're on a layer, they have the display color and all that stuff that you probably already messed with. But there's also this parameter called a name. And I mean, it depends on the modeling programs you're working with, but at least at a basic level in Rhino, you can add on a name, right? You can call anything, anything. I'm going to call this anything one, and this is anything two. Right, so you can have different names and let those names signify whatever you want it to be. But what I'd like to do as an example for this project, for this session, is to try to use those names to give the model sequence, to start to think about how do you encode the order of construction for each one of these elements into their model properties, so that you could then put them into another workflow and then animate it and basically make videos or construction animations thinking about how they're actually assembled. So it's another level of information, but you could use it for any kind of information too, like cost or whatever. So you can name things manually, just like I was doing. I was clicking on stuff and just typing in stuff, but you can also use Grasshopper. And so in the example script that's in the folder, I have this script here that starts with it's selected masses. If I turn preview, you can see these masses are all selected and added in, and these surfaces are all selected and added in. And if I hover over it, you can see that it's a list of these 6 B reps, and they're in an order, right? And I can use a list item to actually sort of filter through that order to see in terms of which number is which element is at the top of the list, and then how are they ordered in that list. So you can basically just file through that list, right? 0 through 5, which is 6 elements, and that's based on the order of selection. So if I even select it right now, like let's say I click on this and I want to select multiple geometries. If I instead pick this, the top, and go from the top down now, and hold down Shift and select all these, and then hit Enter, now my masses have basically been flipped. Oh, I gotta set multiple geometries. There we go. Now my masses have been flipped. So the start is actually going to be the top. Wait, did it? No. Well, let me see. There we go. So now, fourth is that, 0 is the top, 0, 1, 2, 3, 4. Right. So there's an order to all these. And, I did that same thing for the surfaces. They're in an order. And then I use this command called concatenate, which is basically you can add addendums basically to these numbers. So if you get the list of how many items there are, you get 6, and then you make a series out of it, and you go 1 through 6. You can then use an addendum. You can concatenate to basically add the word addition to it and come out with these like full names for all these items. So now I have names for the addition 1 through 6, and the names for the screen elements, which I'm also breaking up into kind of little mesh objects. Let me show you this geometry. I'm breaking it up into little facade panels, right? So that those can also be named in order. And so I'm baking it with those names. So when I click true, they're now baked onto a layer that I've named to, call addition named or screen named. And so, I mean, you could also, you could take this into 3ds Max. So if I go into the Rhino space right now, if I look at my name geometry, now I have objects that are named, you know, addition 5, addition 4, right? They're all named by the Grasshopper script in order. Even all these small screen elements are named in order, screen 1 through whatever the number is. And you can take that into 3ds Max and animate it, but there's also a quicker way to just at like a fundamental level, just once you have this list, that you can animate it. So if you have a list of objects, and then you get the length of it, the list length. We're not even, you know, let's say we know that this is 6. You can use a number slider. Change it from 0 to 6 or 0 to 5, because that's the numbers. Number of things we're going to shift. Or actually 0 to 6. And you use a Boolean toggle. So this is, so why not? Let's see, oh, there we go. So you could animate a list too in the same way that you can sort of build these little animations of things just coming up just by shifting a list, right? But that's like, you could also do that for frames and really get complicated using Grasshopper and just build animations completely out of Grasshopper. But what I like to do is to take this into 3ds Max, where if you export this as an FBX, bring it into 3ds Max, you get all your layers, you get all your names, so that you can then use a free plugin called T-Transfer to basically mass animate a bunch of objects all at once. So if I do it on the addition, for example. So first let's take all the addition objects and just move them up, sort of out of a screen. Let's move them up 1,000 feet in absolute. And let's make it 5,000 feet. Way out of the shot, right? So they're floating up in the air, but they'll kind of collide out into the screen once I get to it. So I can take the first element and do set key, and sort of set its position up top, and then let's say I want to go, I don't know, 2 seconds, 3 seconds, and then come out and then bring it to its final position, which was back at 0, right? And I'm gonna set it. So now I can actually transfer this animation with a delay. So let's say I want to do a delay of, I don't know, 3 seconds. And you can do a fixed, and you can order it by selection. So I'm gonna pick an animated object. So I'm picking addition 1, which has an animation in it. And I'm gonna transform its absolute Z axis. You can also do X and Y if you want to get crazy and do all sorts of stuff, but just for the purpose of the tutorial, it's just things coming in from the Z. And then we can then go to 2, Shift, hold down Shift, and select down all the way down to 6. So now you've selected them in order. And then if you click Transfer Animation, it transfers the animation. So that now you basically get an animation of all 3 of those things coming in. And you can play with the timing, and you can do a cubic thing where it speeds up as it goes faster, or different kinds of delays. You can play with the delay to get something that you might or might not like. I'll also do it for the screen, because maybe when it's just a few elements, it's a little bit harder to see. So like, let's say I go to the screen, and let's say I want to do this somewhere at like 30 seconds, right? Because like a lot of construction, maybe you have some of the addition and then you'll start doing the screen. I will do, first we got to offset these guys, all of these guys, to get them out of the screen. So let's do 5,000 again. All right, and then we'll take this guy, set it to 30, and then come to maybe 31, maybe 32. Make it kind of fast, because maybe just 31, because it's screen, there's still like 40 beats, not going to have much time. So let's just set it, and then make the delay like 1 second. And then pick the animated object to screen, and then 2, and then shift select screen 43, transfer animation, right? So now I get, oh, maybe you can't see it from this angle. Oh, was this never, where did this guy go? Oh, you know what? I don't think I ever even,
I think you have to set the first action.
I never set that first one, yeah. So you can also just like select it and then just mass delete all these keys, delete selected keys, right? So now you can just start it. So all these guys are like up in the air right now. So let's go to 30, set it, 1. Oh yeah, I need to set it to 0. That's what I forgot to do. Set it to 0. So now it comes back into position. And then set it. So now it's got that. And so it's still set as screen 1 and for the animated objects. So I just do transfer animation. There we go. You get like a whole string of animations, right? And so, I'm starting with these very simple examples where you do selection to organize your objects. But when you get to like a full building, obviously it doesn't get you as far, right? So that's really where coming into like making a real parametric model for your project is really critical, where you have all your elements organized, or at least all your fundamental elements. It really helps for this kind of stuff, because you can actually start to infuse all that data in all the elements. So, this next example is basically something like that, fully parametric building where the model space is really nothing except for the world 0, 0, this little base plane right here. And based on that, I'm going to draw a rectangle. And that rectangle can be whatever it wants to be. It's a certain number of feet. I was trying to use like sort of lab dimensions because we love labs here. And taking that, and then based on those lengths, starting to break down the number of bays so that you can basically create first of all, on all the floor lines, right? You'd also have floors, but for all of these floor lines, you would have a wireframe for the structure that's based on that grid. And so these points become columns, beams, the floor slabs are the panels in between, but it's all these sorts of offsets. But then because it's organized in a parametric environment, you can start to say, okay, well, in construction, how is this all going to come together? So I'll show the structure first. So let's see the structure here. Right, so you have this sort of structure. It's like mass timber at the top and then concrete at the bottom with the different materials. You can see it's like different streams because it's the basement structure, the podium structure, and the upper structure, but they're all just stacked on top of each other. And they're based on these grids that we're making. But then within it, you also have a core. And this was more like a concrete core, but in the video I'll show later, it was a brace frame core because mass timber really should be using brace frame. But then also glazing, which gets a little bit heavier to preview, might be a little slow. But it's oh, maybe it's, oh, that's a shape. So it should be this. So all the glazing too. So even down to the mullions, and that if you go back to I think it's the first or second Grasshopper session, you can see how we're generating these facade panels. It's a really similar process to what's happening on the floor slabs, but just happening kind of kicked up and between floors. So you get these panels that basically define your facade spacing, and you can, you know, add a bunch of facade spacing. So it's basically a parametric building that's all pulled together. And the same way that we're naming all these things from before, you know, I can actually name it. Let's see. So there's all the names, right? Structure 0 through 1319, and this is a sort of a smaller version of the tower that I was trying to make, because when you get really big, it gets really slow. But you know, all these elements are basically organized individually and can be baked and put into an FBX and thrown into 3ds Max. So that's what I have here. Maybe I can show just an animation of the structure. Might be fun. We're at 120, so we still got time. So the foundation is just a thing to see. So, you know, the same drill as before. Take all the structure. I'm going to move it all up. 5,000. Oh, I got to get my key transfer in here. It's just a little plugin, drag and drop it. It just starts out sort of fresh each time. So now I just go to structure 0, and I'm going to, so I can get to set key, set it here. So it's set up at the top, and then I'm going to go, say, we have a lot of these, so let's just say 1. Just keep it 1 second, one motion, and you can even do multiple steps for the frames. Maybe I could show you that. Like, let's say you want to go from 5,000 to 1,000, right? You can do really complicated sort of drops too. So let's say I do 1,000, so it's just above it, and then I go one more frame, and then I want it to be at like 100. Right, so then I set it at 100, and then I go to 3, and I'll set it to finally find its home at 0, and we can set that. And so I can pick that as the animated object, and let's say the stagger can be, you know, this is like a 4-second animation. Maybe I want to make the stagger, you know, you can still make the stagger maybe like 2, and you can still see things dropping simultaneously, but it'd be in different positions. It'd be kind of interesting. So absolute and Z, and then it's ordered by selection. So now I got to go to my selection and select it. Transfer the animation. Take a second. Might even break it. Might break it if I do more than like 200. Let's see what happens. Oh, it did break it. Well, never mind. Let me delete those keys and just do a few. I'm just gonna do like, sometimes you have to just kind of shepherd it and just do like 100, 500 at a time, and you get this many pieces. So all of these. Let's try that one more time. Maybe I'll just do it with like 300 pieces. It doesn't have to be that many, right? And it might be just that I have a lot of stuff open. Oh, I might have crashed it. Oh, let's see. No, it's all still happening. Oh, there we go. Maybe. No. You know what? It's glitching a little bit, but I'm just going to show you the video of what it would look like when I did it with like even more elements and a different script that just takes a lot longer, and you just do it with chunks. But sometimes you just got to like close it out and restart. But it's a finicky plugin, but once you get it down and do it in chunks, you can basically use that same naming structure to get basically anything. I mean, anything that you can name in terms of the order of how it's built, you can go out there and animate this as a construction animation. So yeah, I think it's a really powerful thing when you think about it, even just as a presentation tool for showing that we understand the complexity of what we're building, even if it isn't necessarily like trying to take control of what it is, just representing what you think it could be. And maybe just as a presentation tool to say like, hey, this building is really awesome. It'll be coming up in Kendall Square or whatever, right? And just literally showing it coming up. I think that has a little more impact than just showing it really brightly rendered as a static image, especially when you think about the whole process of what construction is, like the fact that we have it for years and years, and what is the community really going to think about what it's going to be at all these different stages. It can be a really powerful tool of saying what this building is. And then even through construction, you could start to somewhat manage what your expectations are for all these different steps. And just by actually taking the time to think about certain things, you start to point out issues a lot earlier. And I also think that just in general, like it doesn't have to be time. You can just, if you do something parametrically, you can infuse all sorts of different parameters into your model. It doesn't have to be the name, it could be the cost, it could be the added value, it could be environmental analysis, it could be things like carbon, embodied carbon, so you can calculate and track and optimize for embodied carbon, and then just present it in a more engaging and tactile way, and really having a sense of what it is, because it's not a really abstract Revit model or a SketchUp model where a wall is just like a chunk or a piece. You're starting to say, that chunk or a piece is really made of something, and what we make that chunk or a piece or wall or slab out of has impacts on what it's going to be. And I think, also if you're doing a lab and you might want to do a mass timber, I totally encourage you guys to look at the script and poke around in it and make whatever you want, right? You can poke around and make any sorts of parametric buildings that are, really tall, really big with this. So you can put different widths and different base sizes and different heights and all sorts of different stuff as like a starting point to sort of think about, how could you do something parametrically? Well, yeah, I guess that's pretty much all I had. I'm sure there's got to be some questions, maybe. We'll see.
I have a general question for everybody. Do we have any amateur animators out there, or Have you made animations in your personal life or your practice? And what types of things were you animating and why?
I've done it before. It was a pain in the ass.
I'm learning, yeah.
You're learning, yeah. Well, we do a bunch of animations, myself, Joe, Anish, of course, and some of the things we were doing was stop motion animation for solar studies, right? Like this is sort of a linear thing that Anish is talking about sequencing, right? Numbers and orders, but what we were doing is using time frames, right? So let's say from 11 a.m. to 3 p.m., you could animate the way that the sun maybe projects light into an interior plane or an interior space. So not just still images that you have to flip through on a slide deck, but really like this repeating sort of fluid thing, just like the Earth is, and that resonates really well with people saying, "Oh, I get how it changes, over the course of time." So time is something you could animate.
I will add one thing about animation that I found really instructive. It's pretty worthwhile to pay attention to how movies, the cinematography in movies works. A lot of the way that architects animate tends to be with the camera forward, and it's because of the way that we experience movies, it can be a little bit disconcerting and awkward. And a lot of times in movies, the camera is actually moving backwards because that's where since the action moving forward, the camera has to move backwards. And so there are certain cinematographic techniques that are probably worth incorporating into any kind of architectural animation, unless it's just diagrammatic.
Definitely. Yeah. And like Enscape is a great example of that, right? Where
Yeah.
you're sort of, you're in God mode and you could walk down the street and then fly into the air and perch yourself on a parapet and look all around you. It's super cool.
Not the least because it's that much faster.
What's that?
Not the least because it's so much faster.
Enscape.
Yeah.
Right. But what we're talking about really is the power behind Grasshopper, right? And not necessarily just animating any old thing. It's about things that maybe other software platforms can't do, like solar radiation heat maps. You really can't get that in Enscape, right? Because it's a Grasshopper thing. Sequential 4-dimensional models like Anish is sharing. Although for constructability, it's also for robotics and construction. So another thing that Enscape can't really do. So we are like blending the worlds of the complexities of manufacturing and simulation and saying, well, with our tool, how can we animate something? And this is one of many ways. Some are much simpler, some are way more intense. What else? What other animations? I know that people, stop motion movies, right? If you've ever seen like a Coraline movie or anything like that, stop motion, those are all 3D printed pneumatic dolls, basically. So if you watch one of those, think of us, think of Anish, and think of animations, because it's one big 2-hour animation. It's pretty amazing.
So when we move the model from Grasshopper Rhino to 3ds Max, is it moved in mesh or polygons?
I did I used meshes, and then I did, it's like there's 2 versions of FBX export, right? What is it? It's like you export something, it's like NURBS, I think. The one that is cleaner. There's, I don't know, you might need to experiment with both of them, but they both kind of do it pretty easily. It's a
Yeah, I think one thing you'll run into when you're experimenting with your export in FBX is the material transfer. So Anish was showing a very white model to begin with, which doesn't really matter probably what format. But if you're going to do something with highly detailed like wood textures, like he showed you in the mass timber example, there's going to be a specificity to that. And the typologies of your texture maps will need to transfer cleanly into FBX.
And what if we had lights in our Rhino model and we want to bring that lights in 3ds Max in our animation as well? So we add lights in 3ds Max or in Rhino?
You can export lights, yeah, in an FBX. You can export lights, you can export views, but I like having you doing it in 3ds Max because lights work differently, and then you're going to look at it in 3ds Max and it might look different. And like I always do my camera setup in 3ds Max too, because there'll be rigged cameras, right, where you'll actually be moving it around a scene and you'll have something in a point. So it's better to do as much as you can in 3ds Max for sure.
Yeah. When it comes to Max, if you have questions, obviously you can ask Anish. I'm not going to throw my name in the hat on that one because I am not up to speed. But Jared DeYoung, of course, and our visualization manager and his whole crew of visualization artists are Max pros. So you can definitely tap them for any of your Max questions.
Sorry, I think I've exported it as NURBS. I'm using meshes mostly to map it, but then I still exported it as NURBS because it was like cleaner with less edges when you do it as NURBS.
And not to interject here, but Chris Munganess in his old life was a Max Revit user. So you can always tap Chris Munganess when it comes to Max.
Nice.
Thank you.
All right. Anything else?
You make it look so easy.
I mean, there's plenty to it. I think if people try to dig into it, I mean, it can just go for forever. And I think, yeah, I mean, just try to make stuff parametrically, I think, and there's just all sorts of possibilities. Right?
Just a general reminder, we're always looking for anyone interested to present on the Grasshopper sessions. Alex Farley has done one, and I've done a few. If nobody wants to go next, I will totally go next. I'm always ready to go next. But reach out to me, reach out to Anish, and we can set you up. And usually we do like a little behind the scenes, like dry run walkthrough to get you comfortable. We talk about your topic, and then you can present to the group, and we'll record you, and you'll be forever in digital stone on ME. Fun. That's my plug. I'm done talking.
No, I mean, have a good afternoon, guys. Yeah, I'll post this recording on ME, and you guys can all watch it after. And
Thank you so much.
Thank you, Anish.